Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Mary Ellen Patton with CAMCO, Senior Vice President, and I am going to introduce Scott Reidenbach. He's an attorney and founding principal with Reidenbach and Associates. Their law firm concentrates its practice in the areas of real estate, condominium, and community association law, and business and civil litigation. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here. And Mary Ellen, I was doing the math today. I've worked with CAMCO and your communities since 2001. So it's been over 20 years now. So I guess I started when I was about 10 years old. But 21 years I've worked with CAMCO, so thank you for having me tonight. So the topic this evening is board member best practices. And as you can imagine, I've done this area of work for over 20 years. I could fill days with board member best practices, but we only have about an hour tonight at most. Mary Ellen asked me to narrow it down to three main topics, which are the following. We're going to talk about board meetings and board meeting minutes. We're going to cover confidentiality and privacy issues involving board members. And then lastly, we're to talk about enforcement of the rules or enforcement of your governing documents as they pertain to your neighbors, your unit owners. There is a chat function. If you look at the bottom of your screen, those of you who are on Zoom every day, like I am, at the bottom is a chat function. So please feel free to utilize that function throughout the presentation. You can also unmute yourself and ask me a question. I've been known to lose my voice after speaking for about half an hour in a row. So please, by all means, interrupt me and ask me any question that's on your mind. But before we get started, I want to get you guys involved a little bit. I'm going to make you do some typing. You ready? In the chat function, I'd like you to answer this question for me. You ready? How long have you been on your current association's board of directors? How long have you been on your current association's board of directors? I'm going to look at the answers. I'm going to jot these down.
Oops.
I have a screen share going on. You guys are high tech. Okay, so we have 2 years, I have 3 months, 3 years, 1.5 years, 3 years, 5.5 years. Impressive. 3 years. Okay, Barb is just elected. Welcome, Barb. 3 months or so. 4 years. Wow, we have a very experienced group here. This is very impressive. So one person is not sure. That's fine. 25 years. Well, Mr. Cornwall, we should change seats here. You should be teaching this to me. 2 months, 3 months. Okay, wow, impressive. I'm going to back out of the chat function. Go back into my view. Okay. So we have a couple newbies on this panel tonight, but the rest of you have a fair amount of experience. So that'll really help me with my comments, knowing your experience and your background. All right, so let's get started. As you know, not all boards are created equally. Some boards are good, some boards are bad. When you're on a board, they develop a personality of their own. Would you agree? You know, boards develop a personality. And it really comes from the top. You know, I've been on many boards, I've advised many boards, and the president of the association, of the board, is critical because they're the ones that really set the tone for the meetings and how things operate and run. Yes, the property managers are part of that relationship, but the board really creates that dynamic about how the meetings are going to take place. Some boards have excellent leadership. I've worked with a lot of the CAMCO boards over the years, And like many of you, you're very credentialed, very experienced. But as you know, some members are brand new. Some people have never been on a board of any kind before. So being on a board is a brand new experience for them. So being patient with people is very important. You're all volunteers. No one's getting paid. No one's getting thanked, right? It's a thankless job for the most part. So be patient with the new members. You know, if you've been on the board for, as you have, 3 years, 25 years, you bring them along, mentor your fellow board members and show them how things are done within your community. So regardless if you're experienced or inexperienced on a board, let's get into a couple key areas of advice. So having attended board meetings over the years, again, for over 20 plus years, here are the most common mistakes that I've seen as an attorney. And here are the most common complaints that I've heard from other board members and unit owners over the years. So I'm going to get into these, and then we're going to get a little more interactive, hopefully, with your feedback. Okay, common complaints. Board members don't attend the meetings. So you have somebody who doesn't show up chronically. They skip every other meeting. They come late, or they attend a meeting and they're not paying attention. They're not interacting with the other board members. That's a common complaint. Number two, what I hear is nobody reads the minutes from the prior meeting. So when it comes time to approve last meeting's minutes, no one's read them. Or worse yet, they were never prepared. They're never prepared and given out to the board members to even review before the next meeting. Another complaint I hear is there was no agenda. No agenda was ever created for the meeting, so it just flows and meanders for hours and hours. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Another common complaint is the agenda is not followed. There's an agenda, but it's not followed. It becomes a free-for-all. Another issue is that items that are not on the agenda end up getting talked about. So you're reading your agenda, and this issue that's now taking on a 15-minute conversation was not on the agenda. So how do you handle that? How do you control that? We're going to discuss that. Another issue, again, these are complaints that I've heard, are that one person dominates the board meeting. One person takes it over and they go off on tangents. They are not following the agenda. They're having speaking objections and soliloquies. So how do you handle that person in a meeting? And then the last complaint that I hear about rather often, and we're to talk about solutions for all these, is that nothing gets done. Nothing gets done. We have these meetings, we talk, we complain, we look at budgets and P&Ls and numbers, but nothing gets done. So how do you combat all of these mistakes? And how do you become a better board member? So Nancy, thank you for your question. And what I'll do is I'll let these, I'll categorize these questions and I'll pop them into the appropriate part of my presentation, if you don't mind. But thank you, Nancy, for the question. Okay, so let's start with board meetings, and in particular, board meeting minutes, okay? I'm asked so often, Scott, what should we put in our minutes? What things should we write down in our minutes? And more importantly, what should we not include in our minutes? What's in and what's out? Before I answer that question, let me ask you this. Again, let's get our chat function fired up a little bit. Who is supposed to take the board meeting minutes? In your chat, let me know who you think. Who's responsible to keep and write down the minutes of the meetings? I've got 2 correct answers so far. I got 3 in a row, 4 in a row. You guys are good. Very good. The secretary. The secretary. Now, where does that duty come from? Why the secretary? Well, it should be, and most often is, in your bylaws. The bylaws of your association set forth the duties and responsibilities of the president, the vice president, and the secretary. And it is more often than not, if not always, the duty of the secretary to keep the minutes. Now, if the secretary isn't there that evening or doesn't want to take the minutes, can anybody take the minutes? Well, the answer is yes. You can always have someone else at the board meeting take those minutes and stand in. The other question I'm asked is, should we be handwriting the minutes? Should we be typing the minutes? Better yet, why can't we just record? Why can't I just hit record on my iPhone and sit back and listen as a secretary? And then later on, a day or a week or a month later, I'll play it back and then I'll type them out. Can that be done? Well, let's talk about that. Unless your governing documents expressly prohibit recording of board meetings. So if your declaration or usually the bylaws prohibit recording of board meeting minutes, if they're not expressly banned, you can record your board meetings. Now, but a couple of things, a couple of caveats. Number one, you have to get the permission of everyone at that meeting to record the meeting. The board members, the property manager. If you have an accountant there for some reason, or an expert or a landscaper, they have to agree also to be recorded. Therefore, obtain permission to record, and then you can record the board meeting. I don't love it. I mean, I don't love the concept. I really don't, because it's rife with problems. As a litigator, a lot of what our practice involves is litigation. I always cringe when I hear that, oh, well, we have a recording from that meeting. Well, I hope it, I hope it says what I think it does, or I hope I don't hear things that I don't want to hear. But recordings can be dangerous. So the general advice that I've heard and that I give my clients is, if you do record the meeting, again, on your phone or, I don't know, a tape recorder, if they still exist, be sure to destroy the recording after it's transcribed. Meaning after the secretary listens to it later and transcribes the minutes, that should be deleted and not saved and not archived. There's just the drawbacks and detriments outweigh the benefits of saving those recordings. Property managers should not be tasked with keeping your minutes. I know it happens. I know it's sometimes convenient for the board to turn and say, Mary Ellen, for example, do you mind just taking these down? You have such good handwriting and you're so good at this. Do you mind? And Mary Ellen, being the nice person she is, might say yes. But it's not appropriate, because it's, again, the secretary's responsibility. And number two, I don't believe that responsibility is in the management agreement that your board has or your association has with CAMCO. So in short, secretary keeps the minutes. Don't rely on your manager to do that. It's not his or her responsibility. The next thing I want to convey to you is this. I'm always asked, Scott, how long should our meetings be? Is there a standard in the industry? Is there a best practice about how long a meeting should be? Should it be 1 hour? Should it be 2 hours? What do you think? And being a lawyer, I say, well, it depends, right? It depends on how long your meeting should be. Now, what does it depend on? Well, if you meet once a month versus quarterly, some boards do meet quarterly. If you're meeting once a month, in my humble opinion, your board meeting should not take more than 1 hour. I'll say it again, 1 hour. Now, you might think, oh my gosh, Scott, you don't know what we're dealing with. We have, COVID issues, we have vendor problems, we have, budget, discussions. I understand that. However, if you prepare and get things done before your board meetings, like throughout the month, your board meetings should move like clockwork. It really should. You're all busy people. The meeting should not take that long, but here's what's happening in the past 2 years. Can anyone think of what 2-year anniversary is upon us in about a week? What started 2 years ago? Well, it's a redundant question, right? The pandemic. So what's happened in the past 2 years during the pandemic is the board meetings, mostly by Zoom, have become social hour or happy hour combined with a board meeting. Is that bad or wrong? Yeah, depends who you talk to. I think it's a great thing, right? It's a great thing that we've all been able to connect and socialize as part of our job of being on a board. However, it's not the most efficient and best practice for a nonprofit or not-for-profit organization to have lengthy board meetings. It's hard enough to get board members, right? It really is. And all of you who are on boards, thank you. Really, thank you. Because as I mentioned, it's a non-paid, thankless job. I don't think people walk around patting you on the back all day, do they, in your community? So, but keeping people on boards is a challenge. You don't want to burn people out by having 3-hour meetings or 4-hour meetings. So your board the best, right? If you're sensing that people are checking their watches or they're missing meetings or they're leaving early, they've got to go, maybe your meeting's too long. So, but if this is really a fun social event and it's become a tradition, if you have a larger board, 7 people or 5 people, and you all like each other, maybe it's okay to have a longer meeting because you're socializing. But in my opinion, 1 hour should be your goal. There was, and let me just check my comments here. Okay, thank you, Tom. I see that. Yeah, Kristen, very good comment. If you do find yourself, if your board is very social and you're having fun and talking about the Sixers and the Phillies, and maybe just schedule a separate meeting later. Maybe once a month, call it social board catch-up meeting, give it a fun name, and then catch up on the social stuff. Right? So you can always break it out or bifurcate it if you want to. But going back to board meetings, whether you love him or hate him, Elon Musk, you've probably heard of Elon Musk. He had a really interesting quote the other month about time and time management. And it goes like this. If you give somebody 30 days to clean their room, it'll take them 30 days. If you give them 3 days to clean the room, they'll get it done in 3 days. So think about that. If you schedule 3 hours for your board meeting, you'll probably get a 3-hour board meeting. If you schedule a 1-hour board meeting, it has a start time and a stop time, odds are you can accomplish your board meeting in 1 hour. So food for thought. Again, whether you love or hate Elon Musk, I like the quote. Okay, and I do have some slides I'll put up on my screen. Thank you for the reminder. I will put my slides up momentarily, but thank you for reminding me of that. Also, as far as how long your board meeting should be, it also depends on the size of your board. In the chat function, is anybody on a board larger than 5 members? Is anyone on a board larger than 5? Okay, I have 1 yes so far. So 1 person, okay. So I'm guessing 7 or 9. So larger boards do tend to have longer meetings. I'll give you that. But the boards that have 3 to 5 members, you can try to stay in that 1 hour time frame if at all possible. I've been on boards that had 20 or more board members. And I've been on a board of a local college, a board of trustees. Our meetings lasted 2 days, 2 full days of meetings, but we only met once a quarter. So I fully understand the timing of all these meetings. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about the agenda. All right, your board meeting agenda. Obviously, if there's a lot going on in your community, you're going to have a larger and longer agenda. So let me share my screen for a moment, and I'm going to put up there, these are the minimums, meaning if you are running a board meeting and you create agendas, let me show you some minimums that should be on your agenda. Okay, I'll ask Mary Ellen, can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So make sure my tech is working. Okay, so here we go. So what to include in your minutes and on your agenda. So again, these are the minimums. I believe a lot of you have your own template for your minutes and your agendas, but for your board meeting minutes, let's look at these quickly. Date, time, and location of your meeting. So for that, if it's being conducted by Zoom, make a note of that. If you're at the clubhouse or someone's house, make a note of that. Attendees and absentees. So you know who was there and who was not there. And this is also helpful because, as I mentioned, if you see that there is a certain board member that's not attending meetings, they're not showing up, make a note of that. It might be time to ask them to move on and find another board member, or it might be something with their schedule or their job. It's worth asking. Unfinished business is something that's always good to wrap up. A lot of times in these board meetings, a lot of things are talked about. The poor secretary is writing feverishly to write it all down if they're not recording, and things get missed. So the unfinished business portion is a good way to look backwards at your last meeting and see if anything has been not done or unfinished, and whether it needs an action step or action item at today's meeting. New business is probably your biggest chunk of your meeting. Committee reports, budget review, looking at the delinquency reports, things of that nature. Future action steps, meaning what you're doing moving forward, whether it be scheduling a property inspection or forming a new committee or getting feedback from committees, include that as well. And then the closing, as I mentioned, have a date of your next meeting, if at all possible. Everyone can write this down on their calendar and schedule it and be able to attend. Write down the time the meeting is adjourned. And then not everyone does this, but it's a good practice for your minutes to be signed by the secretary and signed by the president of the board, if possible. Let me go back and check my chat. Okay, so we're back. The next topic I want to cover is what not to include in your minutes. So I talked about what to put in there. I showed you a slide. Now, what should you not put in your minutes? I always think back to my freshman year in college. I didn't know how to take notes. My high school didn't really teach me that very well. So my first semester of college, I'd be in class like a court reporter, writing down everything that my professor said as fast as I could. I'd be filling the pages, turning pages, my hand would cramp up. I try to write down everything. Do the opposite, right? Do the opposite of what I did. Your board meeting minutes should be short and sweet. Short and sweet. What does that mean? Well, don't include anything extraneous information about, for example, if a unit owner is delinquent, they haven't paid their assessments, they fell behind, you can note that, or it might be on your financial report, better yet, as a printout, but don't start talking about and writing down that they're delinquent because it's rumored they're going through a divorce, or they're delinquent because it's rumored the husband lost his job. You know, things like that believe it or not, make their way into board meeting minutes. And unit owners get offended by that. There are some privacy and confidentiality concerns, which I'll discuss later, but don't add the flavor. Don't be extraneous with what you're talking about as a topic. Also, don't include legal or litigation strategy. I'll repeat that. Legal or litigation strategy or settlement negotiations. Example, if your association is in litigation against a declarant or the builder, developer, as they say, you can discuss the next upcoming court date. You can discuss maybe a recent filing or a recent ruling by the court, but not the strategy or the opinion from the lawyer or what they might think about the value of the case. Things like that should never find their way into board meeting minutes. I can't tell you how many times in 23 years in practice, I've been in litigation and the board meeting minutes get subpoenaed or requested in discovery because they're discoverable. And the plaintiff lawyer gets a hold of them and they go through 2 years or 4 years or longer of board minutes. The golden nuggets they find, like the smoking guns they find, would shock you, because a well-intentioned but uninformed secretary wrote something in them that gave rise to either liability or a claim or supported a cause of action by the plaintiff. So I'm not saying to hide information, but don't include what you don't have to, if that makes sense. The third thing I'd like to mention, that I saw a chat question, which I'll get to in a moment. The third thing not to include in the minutes are personal opinions of the board members. Personal opinions of the board members. Let me give you an example. If John thinks that it's stupid that the fitness center closes at 6 p.m. on Sundays, don't put John thought it was stupid in the minutes. Instead, if the board is voting on the fitness center hours of operation, you can certainly write down that the board voted 3-2 or 4-1, or somebody abstained, but there's no need to include the personal feelings and comments and the chatter by the board members. It doesn't belong in your minutes, but the issue belongs, the vote clearly belongs in your minutes. Okay. Let me just check this chat question to make sure I don't miss answering it. Executive session. We're getting to executive sessions. You read my notes. Okay. Then the other thing to not do in your minutes, and I'll move this along, is do not write down verbatim what everyone is saying. I've seen it done many times where people are, writing frantically to get down all the comments and can you repeat that? And they're writing that down. You're not a court reporter. You're not an investigative journalist. You're not a stenographer. So don't feel compelled to write down everything verbatim. Keep the minutes short. keep the meeting, the board meeting, short. Like James Brown said, hit it and quit it. Hit it and quit it. Have an agenda, have a meeting, get it done, and get out of there, or get offline if you're on Zoom. The last thing about meetings I'd like to mention, does anyone, I'm curious of the answer, this is not my Bible, does anyone use Robert's Rules of Order or Robert's Rules? Have you heard of Robert's Rules? It's probably backwards. Look how thick this is. I never realized how thick this was until I bought this about 15 years ago. A lot of stuff in here. So if you don't know what Robert's Rules is, I suggest that you ask your property manager, because everyone at CAMCO knows Robert's Rules. But for those of you that don't know, Robert's Rules of Order is actually a manual of parliamentary procedure. Manual of Parliamentary Procedure that was first published in 1876. It's been around for a while. And all you need to know is this: Robert's Rules is essentially how a meeting is to be conducted. It's like the decorum and the rules of a proper meeting. And I'm guessing a lot of you are doing these Robert's Rules without even knowing they're Robert's Rules. So when a motion is made, right, there's a motion to do something, to vote on something, there's a proper way to do that. So it's moved, it's seconded, there's a chance to oppose it, and then you've all heard this, all in favor, any opposed, any abstains, so moved, or so ordered, so ruled. Things like that are in Robert's Rules. And again, it's just a nice little framework to use to run your meetings, so they have the proper procedural steps in place. Also, follow your bylaws. Follow your bylaws. I'm always amazed at how few people have ever read their bylaws of their association. They've either glanced at them, or they never read them, or they don't know what bylaws are. But the bylaws are your Bible. That's your Bible if you're a board member, because it tells you how to conduct your meetings. And the other question I'm asked a lot these days is, how often should we meet? Must we meet every month? We don't have a lot going on. Can we just meet once a quarter? Or, well, the starting point for that answer is your bylaws, because the bylaws should, if they're well written, tell you you have to meet quarterly, or you can meet monthly, or no less than. You might find that language. Look at your bylaws. I've had a lot of boards during the pandemic not meet every month. I know the managers right now are like, wait, what are you saying? But people can skip a month. They can push a meeting back. They can meet every 37 days. But again, follow your bylaws. If it says in black and white how often you should meet, I would follow your bylaws. They also tell you about important things like quorum. Do you all know what a quorum is? I'm assuming you do, but to even hold a meeting, or more importantly, to vote on things, often requires a quorum, which simply put is a certain number or percentage of members of a board need to be present or in attendance to conduct business. So think about it logically. If you have a 5-person board and only 2 people show up for the meeting, can you still have your meeting? Probably not. You need to have a minimum quorum to even start the meeting or conduct your affairs. Question, let me read this to myself and I'll give you the answer. Okay, question was, do minutes need to include the names of the specific board members that make and second the motions? They don't have to. They don't have to, but there's no downside if you include that. Like, that doesn't concern me from a legal standpoint. If you're including names of, moved by Scott, seconded by Joe, that doesn't bother me. It's not required though. So you can use names, you don't have to, and there's no major downside in doing so. But good question. I'm just checking my notes. Okay, following the bylaws. Okay, let's get into, we're doing great. You guys are doing great, by the way. What an enjoyable audience. And thank you for your questions and your chats. Okay, confidentiality and privacy. All right, we're in the home stretch here. With Zoom and Teams board meetings, we're on Zoom right now. I could have 5 people sitting right behind this camera and you would never know it, right? You might have your children in the room. You might have your spouse working next to you during a board meeting. If you don't have AirPods or earphones in, everyone is hearing what is being discussed in your board meeting. Is that good or bad? Well, it's bad, right? You don't want that to occur. So in your board meetings, privacy is getting harder because people can record things much more easily, right? Yes, there's always the recording flashing in the screen, right? The little red dot that we see right there. But that's not always the case. People can have their cell phone out of view anywhere, right? And it can be recording the audio of your meeting. It's hard to prevent that from happening. It's hard to police, meaning how do you can't see everything on everyone's screen. So my point is privacy and confidentiality, it's like the wild, wild west right now. It's not like it was when we used to meet in person in our board meetings and be able to see everything and turn our phones off. And so it's getting harder. Does anybody on this Zoom, do you have any policies or procedures in place for your boards that talk about privacy and confidentiality? Maybe in the chat function, if you have anything, maybe a resolution or a bylaw amendment that speaks to privacy and confidentiality as a board, let me know in the chat function. I'm guessing not. I'm guessing most of you don't have that. So what are the rules, right? So what are the rules of confidentiality if there are none in your bylaws? And I'm getting someone to share right now. Okay, I'm reading. I'm just reading this as it's appearing on my screen. Okay, we sign a letter of confidentiality. Is that right? Okay, that's good. That's a good start. And I'm looking at Peter's chat as well. Peter, we sign a confidentiality agreement. Excellent. We have something in our bylaws. And we also have something we give to all people who run for the board. Excellent. That's excellent. And that's helpful, right? That's helpful because it sets expectations. It can act as a defense. And I hate to be a litigator again, I hate to be a lawyer, but if something confidential is divulged or discussed at a board meeting, or worse yet, it makes its way into a board meeting minute, if the board of directors had a policy or had people sign confidentiality statements or agreements, that will help them defend any claim by a unit owner that there is a breach of fiduciary duty by the board. I'll say that again. If the association or the board has a policy in place about confidentiality, or the board members are signing something, a letter, an agreement about confidentiality of information, that will help defend against any claim made against the board for breaching their fiduciary duty by discussing maybe someone's dependency issues or someone's health issues at a board meeting, or a divorce or a bankruptcy, things that are sensitive and confidential, again, that should not be in your minutes. But if it does come up, you have some measure of protection by having that document signed. So I saw a great question earlier about executive session. I love executive sessions. Hate to pick on Mary Ellen, but I will. Mary Ellen, are you seeing a lot of your boards, break out into executive sessions?
Yes, most of mine do.
Okay. Are any of your boards allowing unit owners to attend the board meeting? Do you have open board meetings?
Not on my boards, but we do have associations that allow owners to attend, and then they go into an executive session after they have left.
Yep. And that's pretty common, where the board has an open portion of their meeting, and then anything that's really business related or financial related or legally related, that's when you go into your executive session. I can tell you, having done this for 20 plus years, there is definitely a movement. There is a movement underfoot right now about transparency. Maybe it's political. Maybe it comes from down in Washington. I don't know. But more and more people, meaning unit owners, they're distrustful or mistrustful of what they can't hear and what they can't see. Think about your average board meeting. It takes place at nighttime, right? It's dark out. No one else is there. And these people are huddled down in a basement, the 3 people or the 5 people. What are they doing down there? So there's like this growing distrust in our country about, back office deals and things you can't see and hear. What does that mean for you board members? Well, there's more requests that we see for open meetings and transparency. And that even includes the minutes. We want to see the minutes, I hear. The minutes should be distributed to the owners. They should be published. They should be on the website. Does that give anybody any concerns? Maybe in the chat function, just tell me, is that something that you as a board member are embracing? Or are you a little fearful about that? Like, oh my gosh, like what, why do they want to hear what we're doing? Maybe throw some thoughts into the chat function, and I'll look at those. Okay, so there's an interesting one. So we publish our minutes, but not the executive session minutes. Okay. And do you, I'm like talking to my own computer, but do you on your minutes, do you say executive session confidential, or do you maybe say executive session and then maybe what you discussed, topically, budgeting, comma, or do you just keep it quiet altogether? Yeah. So Cindy, thanks for your comment. The residents elected us and have the right to know what is happening. Absolutely. I mean, there really should be nothing that is, confidential and private that the owners should not be aware of, right? It's their money. You're one of them. They're one of you. But that being said, there are things, again, financial, collections, litigation strategy, things that I would say they're stuff of boards, right? It's board stuff. Not everything has to be shared in real time. That's the key. In real time, meaning with unit owners present, or even in the minutes, because some things the owner should know about, but it has to be run past your attorney. Maybe you have to run it past your accountant. Maybe your, the financial planner that's managing your reserve account. So not everything can be shot out in real time to the owners. it doesn't mean you're hiding anything. It just means some things are more sensitive and need to be reviewed or looked at by a third-party professional before it goes right to the owners, unfiltered. Does that make sense? So yes, you're not hiding things, but some things are real time, some things are after the fact. So the challenge, and we have about 10 minutes to go here. The challenge for you board members is balancing the board transparency, right? Being transparent with unit owner privacy. I'll say it again. You're trying to balance board transparency with unit owner privacy. That's a balancing act. Again, executive sessions I love for legal discussions, financial discussions, disciplinary matters. If any of your associations have employees, housekeeping, maybe a guard, security detail that are employees of the association, if there is a personnel matter or a disciplinary matter, that's not proper to discuss openly to your members or write about in detail in your minutes. Because again, that might trigger some HR or legal implications, or if you're discussing medical issues, then you're in HIPAA land. Okay, I'm checking my chat questions. We should manage to no surprises. I'm just reading Russ's comment. We should manage to quote no surprises. Okay, so Russ, meaning the owner should not be surprised by anything happening. Is that what your comment is? So don't hide things, don't surprise owners. Yeah, absolutely. But again, some things you have to wait a couple of days, maybe a week or so, run it past legal counsel, run it past your accountant or other. Then you give them, the full and complete picture. Because oftentimes you're in a board meeting, things are just flying around, right? I heard this. We just got this in yesterday. I haven't read it yet. Things are frenetic in board meetings at times. Okay, so what is confidential? Meaning, what is confidential that should be out of your meetings altogether? Again, maybe it's a pending divorce by a unit owner that someone's caught wind of. Maybe someone has just lost their job. All right, don't mention that in your minutes. Maybe someone contracted COVID, right? I spent 1.5 years handling that issue about, what do we say or not say about people who have contracted COVID in our building, on my hallway, in our community? How do we handle that? So I'm not going to spend much time on that, if any, right now, because I think that's hopefully in the past, those issues. And we've all handled those, extensively the past 1.5 years. So the rule of thumb is don't gossip at the board meetings, especially if being recorded. Don't gossip. Don't put the gossip in your minutes. That sounds like a no-brainer, but don't put the chatter, right, in your board minutes. Discuss confidential and legal matters in executive session. And again, don't put the confidential information in your minutes. I know it sounds basic and I'm being redundant on purpose, but don't put confidential stuff in your minutes. Now, lastly, Mary Ellen, am I okay with time? I have 8 minutes left.
Yes.
Am I good? Okay, everyone staying awake? Let me check my view. Okay, yep, Kathleen's awake. Harriet's falling. Harriet, you're awake? All right, good. Harriet's awake. All right. Okay, so lastly, here we go. Enforcing the rules, enforcing your association's rules, your governing documents, the important stuff about living in your community. Associations have a lot of rules. My God, I can't even go through half of them, but whether it be about, a pet violation, It could be they have too many dogs, they're not picking up after their dog, they have the wrong breed of dogs, the dog weighs too much. I can go through a lot of pet examples. You might have rules about renters, right? Airbnb and VRBO and renters. You might have a rule about that or a policy in place. They're not always followed, right? The rules aren't always followed, as we know. You have delinquencies. People aren't paying their assessments on time. So what do you do about that as a board? So the rules are usually black and white and very clear, right? I'm waiting for the laughter. So most associations' rules and regulations are clear as a bell, no gray area, they're black and white. Not true. With CAMCO managed properties, I see association rules and regulations being better than most. I see a lot of great rules and regulations that are getting better and better. But what about the penalties for breaking the rules? Are the penalties for breaking the rules in your association clear? Meaning the board has nothing to really talk about. The enforcement provisions are clear. The first time penalty is clear. The daily fine amount is clear as a bell. I can't hear the laughter, but no, that doesn't always happen. So you as a board sometimes have your hands full because a violation occurs, right? Somebody put a hot tub on their deck. There's political signs everywhere. There's a violation. The way that you handle it today, what if it's different than the previous administration, the prior board? What if they did it differently than you? Is that bad? Is it good? Does it create liability? There's a phrase I want you to maybe jot down or remember. It's called selective enforcement. Selective enforcement. And that is often the caption or the cause of action in a lawsuit brought by a unit owner against the board or a unit owner who's suing the association for selective enforcement. What does that mean? It means this. If you have a rule and there's a penalty for that rule and there's a violation, you must treat everyone equally. You can't make an exception for Judy. You can't give Judy a payment plan agreement to pay off her delinquency, but you put John into collection right away because John's a pain in the what. You don't like John. He goes right to collection, right? Don't pass go. But Judy, she's nice. She's my neighbor, former board member. We're going to cut her a break, give her more time to pay, overlook that violation, but not against John. We don't like John. Does this happen? Unfortunately, it does. And what it gives rise to is a cause of action, a lawsuit, if the owner is really mad about it, for selective enforcement. Apply and enforce your rules equally and evenly, regardless of who the offender is. That way you'll hopefully escape liability and not have people crying about favoritism or cronyism at the board level. That's not a fun allegation to manage. And if you want to create distrust or mistrust in your community, selectively enforce your rules. You'll have an uprising on your hands because everyone talks. And I've seen more plaintiff lawyers win these cases because what they do is they subpoena all of the, or ask for in discovery, all of the old board meeting minutes and maybe the recordings of minutes, and they depose the board members, you guys, and ask them how they handled this violation and this violation. And boy, if they're different at all, if they're disparate and different, that could give rise to a claim against the board for breaching your fiduciary duties for selectively enforcing your rules. My last few comments, I'm going to check your chats and make sure to miss anything. So if you're enforcing your rules, right, you're the board, you're enforcing the rules, become familiar with what your rules are. Know what you do about parking and pets and marijuana smoke wafting through the through your windows at nighttime. Is that a violation? I don't know. Is it medical or recreational? Who knows, right? But know what your rules are. Number two, look at any of your past resolutions. Oftentimes boards have resolutions and they adopt things, in between the governing documents are often resolutions and motions that the board has adopted and passed that kind of fill in the cracks between the declaration, the bylaws, the rules and regulations. So look at those documents to know what to do as a board. What are your guidelines as a board? And if things are not clear, meaning if you spend a lot of time as a board figuring out, do we fine them or do we sue them or do we work out a deal? Like, what do we do? Maybe ask your legal counsel to help you create some parameters, some guidelines for enforcing the rules and enforcing penalties. And lastly, I'm going to end right on the dot at 7 p.m. How good are we? Don't play favorites or make exceptions. It's hard because if you're trying to sue your neighbor or sue a friend of yours as a board member, it's difficult and challenging. I know that, but blame the lawyer, right? Blame the big bad lawyer. You're just doing your job on the board. I'm going to stop there. Mary Ellen, if anything you want me to answer or address, I'm happy to stay on. Otherwise, I'm done.
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Scott for presenting tonight. I think this was really, really informative for everybody. I see we're getting some chats. Are there any, Russ says, are there any specific or specialized services that you provide to CAMCO that are important for us to know besides being a great attorney?
Hey, thank you, Russ. No, I would say this, I know that CAMCO works with a lot of the top attorneys in this area. They have a great roster of attorneys that they have do these programs and provide counsel. Yeah, I mean, I'd ask CAMCO. There's certainly things that they have in their database that are, forms, or they can direct you to the appropriate attorney on their, on their roster to answer your questions.
And then somebody, Kristen said, are executive session notes discoverable or subpoenable?
Yeah, they
are.
They are. Yeah, they are. And again, it's just, don't less is more, right? Less is more. If you're in executive session, you can discuss a lot. Obviously, it's more of an open forum, but just don't write a lot. Like don't feel as though because you're now an executive, oh, I can really let it fly now on my notes, my minutes. No, keep it short, keep it clipped, both in executive and in open sessions, because they're both discoverable.
I think Peter said informal meetings of the board, rules and minutes. Okay. I think
Yeah, Peter, great question. Listen, board members often talk between meetings, right? I mean, you see each other, playing pickleball maybe, or at the pool, and maybe 2 out of 3 members start chatting, or 3 out of 5. Is that a board meeting? No, that's just a conversation, right?
Mhm.
So anything you discuss informally is not formally part of any board meeting, should not be discoverable. But again, the optics might look bad to your neighbors if you're having little side board conventions.
I think Kristen said, I think this is our last question, then we'll wrap it up. How do we keep track to ensure we're being consistent? I think that goes along with less. Less is better than a whole lot of information.
Keep track to ensure. Yeah, and Kristen, if I didn't answer your question, Kristen, by all means, get my email, or anybody can get my email from here. Let me put it up on the screen quickly. You can get my email address. Anything you didn't get to ask me or I didn't answer, by all means, shoot me an email, and I'm
Thank you,
happy
Scott.
to. Of course, let me just put that up really quick.
And there will be recordings. There's a recording of this for board members that weren't able to attend. So if somebody in your association board team wasn't able to be on, you can request them. They can reach out to your manager. And also, I
Absolutely.
wanted to just let everybody know the next CAMCO board events. We have the Vanica portal training on March 4th at 12 noon. And we're also going to have another roundtable on March 23rd at 6 p.m. And of course, you'll all receive an invite. You can also go on the CAMCO website. There's a list. If you navigate through education, you'll see a list of some of the upcoming board member roundtables and the Vanica sessions, our portal, our owner's portal. All right. Thank you, Scott. That was really informative. Thanks, everyone, for giving us your time tonight. And we'll see everybody soon.